ready for another episode of the Voiceover Gurus podcast. Real talk about the voiceover industry.
Book behind me.
Wait.
This book, I did an interview with one of the authors of this book.
Oh, okay. Tools, totems, and totalities.
The
That's
modern
interesting.
construction of the hegemonic technology.
What is
Whatever
hegemonic?
the hell that means.
I know.
When I finally edit and release the podcast, you'll find out.
Very technical.
Their
All right.
PR reached out to me to interview the authors of the book, and I was thinking, why the hell did they contact me? And then I thought, oh, it's probably because that's in my name.
The tech. Mhm.
Like, he must be a tech guy. Let's get him. And so I could have either said, I'm not the guy, or what the hell? I'm enjoying this interview process. I'm getting better at it. Let's just try something completely far out of left field and just see let's see what happens.
So maybe you are the guy.
We'll see. I mean, I had a good conversation with him. I'm extremely good at taking people off topic, and I did exactly that. And we were like talking about totally different stuff, and it was great. I mean, it was great.
I'm looking forward to that. All right. And that starts off. Welcome back to the Voiceover Gurus podcast. I'm your host, Linda Bruno. As you will notice, I am actually recording this podcast from my home because I managed to fall off of a 3-foot wall in my backyard and blew out my knee. So I did not want to not record the podcast. So I thought, I'm just going to do it from home. But anyway, I'm icing it, and I might have to remove the ice in about 15 minutes. But I'm super excited because my good friend Rob Reider had a wonderful suggestion of a topic. As you all know, I'm trying to pick some very creative and fun things for you guys to learn about. And then he mentioned that he was very good friends with George Whittam, and that he would be willing to come on the show. So welcome, Rob. Welcome, George.
Thank you.
How
Yes.
you doing?
Great to have you guys here. So first off, I know Rob's story. Rob's been on the podcast. George, tell me about yours. How did you get started?
Oh, it started really more related to music because my father is a pretty musical guy. A lot of my family is. And so when I was young, my dad always had instruments, but also my dad was into electronics a bit. So we also had gadgets around, like tape recorders and things like that. So I was always playing with these things and enjoying experimenting with recording, but never anything serious, just for fun, just always for fun. And as I got into my high school years, I was still very much involved in technology and science. And those were my main loves, while I still played music in the marching band and the concert band and the jazz band. When I went to college at Virginia Tech, I went there for electrical engineering because I thought that would be the area I need to focus on if I want to be involved in recording technology. I didn't really fully understand that what I really wanted to do actually was be an audio engineer, not a equipment designer, but someone that runs and operates and runs the gear. I was a little misdirected, but my grades were good enough. I got into Virginia Tech as an engineer, which is not a small feat. And I made it almost 2 years before I almost failed out of college. I was doing miserably. I was not doing well
Had
for
no
various
idea.
reasons. I had a medical thing come up that was hugely disruptive. It was just all sorts of things. And I ended up, by some absolute sheer fortune, I took a music elective in music history, in jazz history, and the class was in a salon, like a music salon on campus. This beautiful, small but really beautifully designed room. And the professor was this cool older gentleman who knew his music history, and there were Neumann mics hanging all around the room from the ceiling. And I was like, "Whoa, what is going on in here?"
Wow.
And I asked him, and he said, "Oh, we have a recording studio here." And I said, "Well, how do I get to use that studio?" He's like, "You got to be a music major." I said, "All right, I was like, "How do you do that?" He's like, "You got to audition." I was like, "Okay." I picked up my horn. I practiced all summer. I managed to get good enough to get into the music school. I wouldn't have gotten into music school at Berkeley, but I got into music school at Virginia Tech.
All right.
Playing trumpet,
And
right? You were a trumpet player?
trumpet.
Yeah.
Playing trumpet.
Wow.
And so I graduated with a music degree in audio technology and a minor in communications. and hit the ground running. Got an internship right out of college in a studio. Realized I hated being in a recording studio as an intern. Treated at that low level. I hated the hierarchy of it all. And so my dad, being an awesome dude that he is, he and I built a studio in a recording in a RV. We made a
Oh, how
mobile
cool.
recording studio in an RV.
Wow.
And that was a blast. It never made much money, but I did get paid occasionally to record bands live on location, even a big gospel performance at a church in
Yeah.
Wilmington, Delaware. I mean, you name it. I did all klezmer band at a Jewish wedding. I
Yeah,
did everything.
That's fantastic.
it's great music.
It was amazing, right? But
Wonderful.
then when I had opportunities to try new things, and I always did try new things. This is one of my strong suits, and my weaknesses is squirrel. So
Yeah.
it's probably why I'm not a pilot, because to be a pilot, you have to
Right.
focus on learning to be a pilot for a long time. So the story goes, I went to a radio station. I did remote engineering for the Eagles football team broadcast, the Eagles radio network. And then through that position, the fellow who referred me, Lane Massey, introduced me to a producer at the station. The producer went off to become a voice actor on his own right, of great regard, doing, promos and trailers, the big glamorous voiceover gigs. He moved to California. 3 years later, I moved to California. He said, "Hey, can you fix my studio?" I said, "Yes." Then he referred me to his management company. The management company referred me to their talent.
Oh, wow.
And that was kind of where that was the genesis of it all. How I call Howard Parker, who was my client at the time, my client zero. And
Wow.
that's
So what
where it
year
all
was
started.
this?
That would have been 2004 was when I moved to
Okay.
California. And
So it's been a bit.
And while in California, when I moved to LA, I was doing production sound mixing, trying to start a whole nother business, going on movie sets and doing the sound on a movie set, which I had no business doing and no background in.
And
Wow.
that's tough work.
Yeah. It
I
was
would
tough
imagine it
work.
would be.
It required a whole other different set of discipline, terminology, gear, everything. Like a
Wow.
completely unique skill set and equipment and everything. Totally. So rather than lean on what I know, which was music, multi-track recording and live music and live sound, I just went in a whole different direction.
That's
I
awesome,
I
though.
still look back and laugh. Why the hell did I think that would be the right decision? But that's what happened. So that was a diversion. But when I met and worked with Don LaFontaine, that was where I really knew it was time to 100% focus on voiceover actors as my client base. And that was it. That was in 2005. And
Wow.
that
Now,
was, I went
Rob,
all
how do
in.
you
I
guys
sold
know
all
each
my
other?
gear.
Well, I know George through when I started getting involved in voiceover as a transition out of the air show announcing business. One of the first podcasts I came across was the Voiceover Body Shop, and George and Dan Leonard hosted that thing, and I learned things and actually used both Dan and George to help tweak my studio. The thing behind me, or this GIK acoustics baffle here, was the last thing that I put in the studio when George said, "I'm hearing some things." And I did not hear those things until he called my attention to this little bit of room reverberation. That, I put on my trusty Sonys and cranked him up. And he was right. So I bought exactly what he told me to buy, put it exactly where he told me to put it. And so now, with the other work that I've done with him, I have just stayed in touch with George on a semi-regular basis. As a matter of fact, I was out in California a month or so ago, a little over a month ago. We had spent 2 hours together at lunch. But George is being very humble. He said he met Don LaFontaine. He also designed an incredible studio for the guy who is probably the best known promo guy in the business.
Yeah.
And you can go ahead and drop the name, George.
Are you talking about Joe Cipriano?
I am talking about Joe Cipriano, Joe Cic.
Mhm.
And when he moved, Joe Cipriano asked George to help him put a studio in his new place. And George I don't know if people have golden ears, but there are people whose ears are trained better than most of ours. And I'm a former audio guy, and I thought I heard things pretty well. But when you get another set of ears on things, another set of eyes on things, folks like George and Dan and Jim Edgar and a few other Tim Tippett and other guys are out there, and they really can make a difference. But I have stayed in touch with George. He helps me with my mastering of my audiobooks. He set up a system for that that makes it exceptionally constant, high quality, and automated.
Yeah.
Mm.
My thing is, it's got to be easy. I think okay. I mean, some people are going to hate me for this, but I think audio engineers can be a little bit snobby and gatekeepy, as we like to say, in that, this is difficult. We spent years mastering this, getting really good at this. We hear things you don't hear, trust us, don't trust you, And so my job is to, because the voice, and the reality of it is the voice actor does have to trust themselves. They do have to produce audio. They don't get to just talk into a mic and forget about the rest. That's a total fallacy. It's an old Hollywood notion of what voiceover is and maybe was. You're the talent. You walk into the room and you read the script and you get back in
That's
your
usually
car.
one of the first bubbles I have to burst when people come to my studio, and you have to learn tech. This is like, at least, in my opinion, 75% of it. The rest is, you hone the craft, and that's great. But if your room does not sound good, if you do not know how to handle difficulties on the fly in the middle of a session, you're toast. People aren't going to hire you again. So if we go back and we think about beginner, obviously people get very intimidated by the concept of putting together a studio. What do you think is the easiest entry way to go for someone just starting out?
For most folks that have, let's leave out the people living in a tiny New York apartment or something, but let's say most folks with a reasonable sized home or apartment that has some closet space and things like this, the first place to look is a closet, because it's a clothing closet. If you have a walk-in clothing closet, you're ahead of the game, because if you've got at least 2 or 3 of the walls of that closet with clothing and stuff and shelving, you've basically got a booth, because all that stuff in there will kill off all the echoey, reflective, resonant sounds that make a normal room sound bad. And the thing is, you do have to train your ear as to what it's supposed to sound like. And so you have to listen to things in a different way than you're accustomed to. The reason I'm so good, and I appear to have a golden ear about the sound, is it's sheer repetition of, like I said, I don't like to practice things forever. But this is by mistake, is something I've practiced, which is listening to thousands and thousands of voiceover people in their closets and their booths. And so that means that I can pick up on very subtle things that somebody else wouldn't pick up. But once I point out to them those things, then they know to listen for those things. Whether they're good at it or not is a different animal, but at least they're aware of it, right? And so that's a big part of it. And you can sound good in the most unusual circumstances, and you can sound bad in the most, you can sound bad in a $10,000 booth that you just purchased, and it can sound terrible. This is a huge confusion.
Yes.
Why is that? This is a great conversation. How much time do you have?
Should I say 2 words?
Are we doing a two-parter?
Should I say standing waves?
Standing waves? Yeah.
So that's one of them.
Every space that you're in has several problems. It has reverb, which is what most people think of. You clap your hands and it goes, tsh. That's the sound of the reverb decaying down, right? Big rooms, racquetball courts, it goes, tsh, like that. Reverb's not really the problem in a small room or a closet. It's resonances. And so the reason you sound like you're in a box or in a tube or in a tunnel or tinny or all the different words people use to describe it is because that room wasn't treated correctly. But a walk-in closet full of clothing, man, most of the time sounds amazing. However, a sound booth that was built by a company to be an isolation booth first, most of those products were made to keep the guy playing a tenor sax from pissing off his family and the neighbors. That's all they were made to do. That's it.
Yeah.
They were not meant to be accurate recording spaces, right? So people are still buying these and they're still being marketed as such. And then they're being, it's a misnomer. But it's not entirely the fault of the company making them either. It's the fault of the acoustics field not having education or studied the science of recording a voiceover in a small booth. I have the books on the shelf right back here. I have read through many of them as much as I can stand. And I'm like, where's the part about small rooms? And they'll be like, small rooms or any rooms roughly 8 by 10 feet or larger, or, they're like, a small room starts at the size of a bedroom, right?
Right.
And so there's no science. There is no science on it. There's nobody releasing white papers except me. I did one for NAB in 2016, which, by the way, I can't find anymore and nobody knows what happened to it. But I did a white paper for NAB about recording good voiceover in a small booth.
Wow.
And not that I'm bitter, or anything, that if you type my name in on the NAB website and you can't find my name, I'm not bitter. Actually, it ticks me off. I did write a paper for NAB. They did accept it. But small booths, they have unique problems. And the acoustic science engineers, the architects and all those, just don't regard them as usable spaces. So we've had to improvise and figure this out. And that's what I've been doing. And sometimes it's a total happy accident when it sounds great. And sometimes it sounds bad when you spend a ton of money because the companies selling the products didn't realize where the deficiencies were. And they didn't have the 10,000 hours of listening to voiceover actors in a small booth, right? So here I am. This has been my axe to grind, one of many. But this is one of my axes to grind, which is getting people's little boxes, little closets and everything to sound good. So all that to loop around is that you can sound really great in a closet. You can sound amazing without spending a penny on soundproofing or gear. I mean, or on acoustics, if you have the right space to begin with.
What about going the opposite direction, though? Because I have had some clients that have used me for years and years and years. So there's a very consistent thing that they like to hear, from me. And they know what my room sounds like. So for a while there, I was in an office building that was a bit loud. And so I'm like, oh, somebody's selling a whisper room out of Brooklyn. I'm going to get that, get this whisper room and see if it'll help the situation. So they got the whisper room. We put it together contained within my studio. And I started recording from there, and my clients were not happy. They were like, you sound too dead. They all complained. So I basically sold the whisper room and went back to my other situation. I mean, is it just because the room I was working in was, I don't know, sufficient enough? I don't know. Because this was not just one client telling me that it was sounding too dead. It had lost something.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know if that makes sense.
The too dead thing is something that comes up a lot. It'll be mentioned. It's not that it's too dead. It's that the wrong frequencies are too dead. So it's not, when you talk about a room being dead, there's only one truly dead room, and that's called an anechoic chamber. Look it up. Anechoic chamber. When you see a picture of one, you'll go, what the hell is that? It's this huge room with chicken wire that's lining all the walls, including the floor. And outside of the chicken wire are these gigantic cones of acoustic material absorbing sound. They're the quietest places on Earth. They're designed for scientific measurement. They have no echo, and they are truly dead. That's a dead room, right? Nobody wants to record or be heard of or stand in or even be in one of these rooms.
It can get painful after a while.
You can go crazy.
You get a sense of really a lot of discomfort in one of those.
Yeah, I've never gotten to see one yet. It's one, again, as an audio nerd, it's a bucket list.
I've been in one, and we were literally walking on the chicken wire. Whatever the floor was of a mesh wire. There was no floor in it. And it was almost as if you could feel or hear your heart beating, not just feel it, but it was a very, very strange and uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, okay, we're talking about extremes, but that's an extreme example. But what happens in these small boxes is the sound foam and the carpet gets rid of all the reverb or the high frequency sound, but leaves behind only the low frequency sound. And that's still allowed to continue resonating and bouncing. And so what people says it sounds too dead. They say it sounds too dead. But what really is, it sounds not, doesn't sound natural. It doesn't sound balanced. It doesn't sound uncolored. These rooms color the voice, the sound. A bigger room has far less coloration, but it has its own problems. More reverb and more noise. As the room gets bigger, like I'm in my apartment, my office here, I'm leaning on some processing in my mixer so that you don't hear the constant gas-powered, well, I don't know what it is. It's a leaf blower or something that's been going for 2 hours this morning. You don't hear it. But if you were a voice actor, you could not get away with being in this room that I'm in right now. And I have a booth, and I could be in that booth. However, if a Cessna flies over, I will hear the Cessna. If it flies, and they fly right over my apartment. I'm in the takeoff lane where they make the left turn down the coastline of Santa Monica Airport. So I hear everything, even if I'm in the booth. I can't win. So, so the bottom line is the bigger rooms sound better. Every good commercial studio you've ever been in is not going to be a small ISO booth. It's going to have a 10 to 12 foot ceiling and a lot of space because it just sounds better. It just has different problems you have to solve, which is like reverb time and noise control, and if most of the work you do is self-directed, which face it is, you're auditioning 90% of the time and doing jobs the other 10. And if you're really lucky, it's 80-20. That work is all done time shifted. You can do it when you want to. So if it's noisy, you don't record. It's the quiet on demand is it's my phrase I've coined. That's that kind of work that's critical to have noise control. You're on a Source Connect session at 4 on Friday, and that's when the kids get home from school. That's when the traffic ramps up in your neighborhood. Doesn't matter. That's when the session is, and you're being recorded remotely. That's where those bigger investments in soundproofing and all that are required. And so you create a new problem trying to fix the old one. You go from a big, beautiful room to a small ISO booth that doesn't sound as good as your big, beautiful room.
Yeah, I was surprised, actually. So do you think that the booth or the space, wherever you're recording, is ultimately, it's the first stop with everything. You have to get that set up first. Some people are like, I'm going to get this fancy mic and I'm going to, but the fact is the room is the room is the room. We got to figure that out, right?
The room for your sound is the lighting for your photo or your video.
Okay.
If you don't look evenly lit and you have a hard shadow or your head's all shiny or the lighting is just totally wrong or it's all coming from your shoulder and you know what it looks like. It's a lot easier to visualize bad lighting than it is to conceptualize bad acoustics. But this is the relationship of sound to the room and an image to the lighting. It's that important.
Interesting.
You do not get a good image without good lighting. Full stop. I know AI is a different thing. I know everything can be faked nowadays and everything can be relit in post. And I know there's a ton of post things. But at the end of the day, there's still at the top level of our industry where there's professionals involved at every level, from the audio engineering all the way up, they know the difference and they care. And so the low-hanging fruit jobs, they don't care as much. If you can send them something usable that sounds loud enough and clean enough, and you've been able to scrub out all the noise with the latest AI machine learning, algorithm, they're going to be fine. So when you're starting out, you can get away with murder. But when you start getting those critical jobs where there's engineering involved and producers involved, you can't.
So that's my bigger question, my favorite question, because I have a lot of students that are like, oh, I put this processing piece on and I do this with my file. And I'm very old school because I've been doing this so long. And I've worked for very large companies. And the engineers, like you're saying, the producers, they hear everything. And so they want the cleanest, they want raw. They don't want me to put anything on it. So I'm used to creating, they're always like, what's in your mic chain, Linda? And I have to give them everything. They want everything off. They want it to just be my mic. And so I'm getting some confusion here as people are like, oh, no, this producer's telling me to add this or that. And I never touched that stuff. But now, is that the thing? I mean, like you're saying, the low-hanging fruit, they don't care. But yeah, when you start to work with the big clients, they do care. So I don't know.
Would it not be?
I want to point my finger to Rob now, because you are in the trenches, Rob. So
yeah,
what are you finding? What's the percentage of work you do where they say send it raw? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if it depends on if I'm doing audiobooks, I will ask. And I've talked to PJ Oakland about this from who's helped run the audiobook Publishing Association conference.
Right.
But ask the folks whether they want it raw or not. The low-hanging fruit or the less experienced producers may want it processed somewhat to get the levels up to where they belong. It is my contention, though, that if I'm turning in an audition or doing something for a corporate video or some other sort of voiceover work, I do run a little bit of processing, a little bit of gate just to make sure it's going to take away throat noises in between phrases. I do a little, when I'm finished recording, I do a mouth declick, that's an add-on, but people don't hear that. And it's so effective, the mouth declick that I use is so effective that it is not hearable. And no engineer I've ever worked with has complained about that. Also, if I'm doing it for another producer, if I run a little bit of compression, a little bit of normalization, a little bit of compression, and a little bit more normalization, I run it so gently that no engineer has ever complained. But the fact of the matter is, if you overdo it, I'm going to throw that right back to you, George. You can't unbake the cake.
Yeah. I mean, that makes me think of another thing, which is what we call front-end processing versus post-processing. So front-end processing is your classic recording studio or radio production studio channel strip with preamp, high-pass filter, compressor, expander, EQ, blah, blah, blah. And your signal goes all the way through, back out the other end to the console. That's the ultimate and impossible to unbake cake problem. Once you print that processing, it's in there for good. It's forever. So I'm, especially for newer voice talent, I'm hugely against front end processing, because if they don't know what's going wrong and they don't hear that something's done wrong, the damage is done and they can't undo it. So the post processing is it's a very specific to the genre thing, and it's a very specific to the situation thing. And I have had a few clients who are working with somebody new, a few of my talent clients who are working with a new client, and they don't know what they don't know. The client of their client doesn't know what they don't know, or they didn't ask, or they just say, I don't know. And so I have had people say, I send it raw and I send it with my stack or my processing and let them decide. But the higher the level of the job is, there are more people are in the production chain, and they each have more specialized jobs, including a dialogue editor, a remixer, an audio engineer or producer, and they all have these jobs. And so when you're told specifically to keep it raw, I say keep it raw. Now, if you're working with a new client and they tell you to keep it raw and you think, well, I'll use this little bit of processing, they'll never know. If they do know, you lost a client.
Right.
Then you're just like,
Yeah.
Oh, you just lied to us? You wanted to pull one over on us? We're engineers. Of course we can tell you're using expander.
That's true.
We're not dummies. So it's tricky, and it does take some diplomacy and even just asking questions. But on the extremely generalized, very general perspective is the lower the budget and the more you're working directly with your buyer, the more likely it is that they want it fully produced, like all cleaned up, levels, nice and loud. All they have to do is drop it in the Final Cut, and they bounce their file out to YouTube or whatever
Mm-hmm.
they're doing. And that's what they're going to want.
So I hear normalizing is the big thing, and you just brought it up, Rob. Yeah, can you explain for me too? Because, like I said, I don't do anything to my files. What does it mean to normalize an audio file?
It means that it will bring the top peaks of your level up to a predetermined setting, say a lot of folks say -3 decibels, so that all of your recording, if you record it too low in level, you can normalize it and bring it up so it can be heard easily. But even that, it's it's like figuring out the noise floor and things. There's a little bit of magic to it, don't you think, George?
Well, there is a little bit. So the way I look at normalizing is I look at it as a calibration.
Ah,
So
good word.
you as an actor, unless you've got a huge amount of experience and you've been doing the same style of read and using the same gear for year after year, you're going to be able to look over and go, this is my script. I know where the gain knob should be. I can probably predict within a dB of what my recording level is going to be because
Mhm.
I've done it 1,000 times. They probably don't need to normalize. Their
Mhm.
levels are so consistent out of sheer experience. But for everybody else, setting the gain to be consistent with the same levels each time they record is tricky. And so normalizing is just another way of making a little correction, a little calibration, so that maybe one thing you recorded for that client had a peak of -7, another one had a peak of -4. And now you can have them each now have a same peak level each time you send the files out. That's just consistency. It does make it easier. What you shouldn't use it for is for really low recording levels because you just don't know any better. You hit record, you hit stop. The waveform is little tiny stripe across the screen, and then you normalize to bring it up to proper levels. Almost always when that happens, there is a noticeable noise level increase, like the room tone and other noise in the audio file from the self noise of the equipment, other things, all gets louder. You hear more hiss, almost guaranteed you're going to hear more hiss. So you don't want to use it to make up for a dramatically low level. But you do want to, it is not a bad idea. And I don't think there's any harm. All normalizing is a level adjustment. That's
Okay.
all it is. It's
Hmm.
only a control of level of the entire file. No one can
Hmm.
possibly know if you've done it or not. They would never look at the file and go, looks like it's been normalized. The only way they
Right.
would know if it's been normalized if you normalize it to 0 dB. So like the top of the waves touch the top of
Hmm.
the very top of the window. Then they might go, oh, you must have normalized that, because there's no way to get exactly 0 dB recording level all the time. It's
Hmm.
not possible. But yeah, that's normalized. It's often vilified by engineers. Again, there's a little bit of a snobbery or a little that's not proper or that's not the way we do things or blah blah blah. But my whole thing with voice actors is, your job is not just engineering the file. You have a lot more stuff to do and worry about. So if I can use a tool like Normalize to improve the post workflow for you, so you have this flow that's consistent and easy to recreate and do over and over, I'm going to recommend it.
Is there anything that talent can do where you're recording a session and all of a sudden you realize that your mic input was too slightly too hot, and now you've got this file that has some peaks, like some hot peaks. You can't fix that, can you? Afterwards.
Hot peaks, hot peaks.
Hot peaks.
So you got to listen to it. You might even see hot peaks that literally go above 0. They're just right through the roof, right? It does not mean it will sound clipped and distorted. Does not mean that. Transients, like a hard T or a K or something where you hit the first word too hard. A lot of beginners hit the very first word of a phrase hard. It's always a sign of a beginner because they'll give you a wave and the very first thing is a spike, and then the rest of it's like this, right?
Yeah.
That's a very typical thing. And so if that first transient is clipped, it doesn't mean it's going to sound clipped. So if you
Mhm.
listen to the audio and it sounds good, don't panic. Just you can renormalize it. You can take that file and normalize it back down to -3 or something. And again, as long as it sounds clean, you're okay. But if you audibly hear crunchiness,
Yeah,
distortion, overmodulation, if you
you
have
have to redo
absolutely
it.
no choice, there, believe it or not, there are tools like an Isotope. There's a declip function. Isotope RX has declip. It works. It
Really?
works pretty well, shockingly. I've had to use it probably less times than our fingers on my hand. But I've experimented with it, and each time I have played with it, I've been amazed at how, after I apply it, it doesn't sound crunchy or distorted anymore. So
Huh.
there is a way to do it, but I would only do it because these tools exist because the engineer is not the talent. So they're given what they're given, and they have to make it work, right?
Hmm.
If that's routine for you, you just need to correct your recording levels, you know. Don't make that a routine to try to fix everything. Record it
Hmm.
correctly. But yeah, don't panic. You may find out that that recording is still quite listenable.
That's so good. Rob, what's your level of input? What range do you stay in? Do you try to stay in when you're doing an audiobook?
And when I try to do that, I try to peak at -6. And occasionally I'll get a little more. But when I go to master it, that goes into another isotope isotope program called batch processing. And George set me up so that if I record an audiobook, I won't change the microphone. I won't change how far I am from the microphone. I won't change the room I'm in. I won't change the level settings. And then when all of them are done and I'm edited and ready to master, they go into the RX editor, and then there it does some things like loudness control and equalization and maybe a little voice denoise, whatever, some
Hmm.
things that then will then output the audiobook signal to meet the audiobook creation exchange statistics or specifications, I should say.
Yeah.
And it always works. So,
Hmm.
and I've when I started, I was doing things one at a time.
Sure.
And when you're doing it one at a time, you can't set a standard because your ears can play tricks on you.
Right.
And so by doing it in an automated fashion, like batch processing, like George set up for me, I can literally load them in, press go, go have dinner, and an 11-hour book will be mastered and meet spec for ACX in about 14 minutes.
Is this all
Oh,
done
that's
in your
pretty cool.
DAW? How are you?
I
This
do it
is,
on my computer, and I have the RX Isotopes RX. Did they have it in just? I know we have it in standard. Um,
yeah,
Standard
I
version. You
have it
need
too.
standard.
Hmm.
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, when you
and
install the standard package, you get all the plugins, but you also get
Hmm.
a separate uh, host application, an editor program called RX Editor, which is the application he's referring to.
Oh, wow.
And so I
Okay.
set that batch process. It's called a chain and a batch. You have a chain, which is all the different plugins, and then a
Hmm.
batch where you can have it do a whole bunch of
Do.
files automatically, converting them both into WAV and MP3
at the
all
same
at the
time.
same time, and you walk away and it's done. And
So is that mastering?
Yep.
that's essentially
That's it.
mastering in the context of an audiobook, at least. An
Okay.
audio engineer who's a mastering engineer, there are literally people that's their job. They literally master music album recordings for music, and they spend insane amounts of money on speakers and amplifiers and gear, and it's a they are the golden ears of our industry, the mastering engineers. But so when we talk about mastering for audiobooks, it's a lot more of a mechanical automated process, but it does start
Gotcha.
with properly tuned settings, the
Hmm.
equalizing tone and balance, the right amount of mouth noise declicker, or the right amount of denoising. And so that that automated process will end up with a really pleasing final file, but predictably, right? That's the whole concept.
And between chapters that way, the listener will not have to adjust the volume level between one
Ah,
chapter and another. That's annoying. And the Audio Publishers Association and all of the producers of audiobooks, the big five and all of them, they will not, they have oftentimes, if I'm working for a producer or a publisher, they get my raw file. The only thing I do to it is mouth to click.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then they get my raw file and their mastering engineers take care of everything.
Right.
I give them what is called a clean punch edit.
Right.
Punch at it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Has ACX, have they changed their specifications for what you have to submit audio? I mean, Dave was telling me something about that because he had a client that did an audiobook at our studio, and then he had to like reformat all these files. He had to research it because we're not big with audiobooks at the studio. But has that changed, Rob?
There have been some changes in what people think are the standards with a decibel standard versus loudness units, full scale, and things like that. Right, George?
Yeah, I have to be honest. I haven't looked at the most current up-to-date standard ACX has released, if they've changed anything in the last 6 months. I'm not aware. The only time I hear people complain online nowadays is that they'll run some automated testing thing that tests the files, such as ACX check or something like that in Audacity, and they'll get they'll get kicked back something that says the noise floor is too low. That's something I see people mentioning. Like, it said my noise floor is too low. Like, wait a
Wow.
minute. Isn't that a good
A
thing?
good
We're
thing,
trying to
yeah.
get rid of
Yeah,
that.
isn't that a good thing? Yeah. So, but in terms of actual standards, I think there's certain things they've maybe relaxed a little bit because they weren't quite as important. But in general, there's still a very specific decibel average, or what we use called RMS, average level. There was a very specific spec for that they still are very adamant about keeping.
They want it to between minus 18 and minus 23 decibels.
Yeah, I don't believe that's changed. Maybe certain publishers have
No,
different,
it hasn't.
Things. But
Last one I submitted was just about 2 months ago to ACX, and there was no. They analyze as you upload the files into ACX. They analyze the files right away, and I've never had any issue with any of that.
Interesting.
And that's because I'm using the setup that George did for me. There's consistency. There's confidence. And it takes the technical part and compartmentalizes it, especially when you're recording. When you get your levels set to record, you get your room right. When all those things are right, then the head gets to perform.
Yeah.
And that's crucial to
so
get
important.
that the technical becomes so set and basically a second nature type thing. I come in here, I don't have to change anything. All I do is load the file up, give it a name, press record, and talk. And that's if I'm doing stuff for Sporty's Pilot Shop or if I'm doing other narration things. The only time I will change the levels if I'm going to do some sort of commercial that requires a little more energy. But on my equipment, I can knock it down. I have a specific setting, and I can knock it down 6 dB, and then I can talk all I want. Do it today.
Right.
But
yeah, generally, I teach people to have 2 gain settings that are their usual settings. 3, maybe, if somebody does a lot of very soft read stuff, then maybe they need a different setting. But generally, you have a very soft read, a average read, and a very loud performance level read, game animation, character stuff where there's shouting and all sort. Then you have a very different gain setting for that kind of work. And so that repeatability, so that okay, it's a game, I'm going to set my gain here and forget it. Not micromanage it, not hyper control it. Just, okay, I'm doing a game, I'm going to set my gain here. I know I'm going to be fine 99.9% of the time at this point, and I can just get to my performance.
I'm very much more of a voice talent than I would never proclaim to know much about producing, engineering, anything. And I stay in my lane, we'll put it that way. So I tell students too that, because it's such a massive learning curve, that if you don't have some fantastic friend that knows what they're doing, that the best thing to do is to just hire someone to set up your studio for you and teach you the basics. I always say, I know what to do, what I need to do. But beyond that, I don't have the interest, honestly. I want to
Right.
perform. I want to do my auditions. I want to. So,
Yep.
and thankfully, I've had friends growing up who, Brian Lee, he's got massive ears. All he does is, and he helped me set up my first studios in the 90s.
He's a guy that his name comes up in more conversation when it comes to, that guy, Brian Lee?
Yeah.
Totally. He's in certain circles, he's a gold standard of audio production quality for voiceover. Absolutely.
When I met him, it was my first shift at a country station in Fort Myers, Florida. And he was friends with the program director, Paul Orr, who's floating around. And he came in because he had advice for Paul on how to tweak the signal and what they were going to do. And that was my very first meeting with Brian Lee, because he's such a geeky head with that stuff, because it's a passion for him. But it was definitely awesome to have him as a friend, because I got solid advice. But if you don't have that, guys, you're going to pay somebody, because this is just too difficult, honestly. There's too much to know, and it would make you crazy. And then, of course, like we're talking about, how do you balance that? What's your best advice to at least get started in a simple setup, so then you can focus on performance?
Yeah, I don't want you to buy, unless you come from another career. You've set aside a bunch of money and you're like, this is what I'm going to invest in my career. I have this budget. I'll spend your money. No problem. You tell me your budget.
Right.
But be darn honest with your budget. Let's know what your budget is. Don't play with me with the budget. Like, just to say, I have a budget for this and this is what I want to spend. If you have literally no idea, I'll at least give you an idea what you're going to spend. But there are microphones that I will any day of the week recommend to do professional grade work on that are $150, not with no reservations, right? Audio Technica 2035, one of my absolute all-time favorite budget mics. Really great. Sounds great. Self noise low enough. There's not noisy. It's an honest, accurate-ish mic. I mean, we always use the word accurate. It's not about that, but it's got just a natural tone. It doesn't sound overly hyped, overly sibilant, overly bright, whatever. Great.
It sounds like you.
It sounds like you, the way you want to be perceived,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I wanted to sound like you, I would put an Omni microphone right in front of me, and that would be the way I sound, but that's the way I would sound in a room. The listener wants to hear the way you would sound if you were sitting 2 feet from each other, having a nice and intimate conversation. That's what they want to sound like.
Mm-hmm.
And so the right kind of mics do that. And yeah, again, $150 mic. And then the audio interface, they're not getting any simpler. That's the thing that makes me really angry about a lot of gear. They're just getting more feature creep and more complex. Even the most stalwart of basic beginner interfaces, which is the Scarlett Solo by Focusrite, even that one has suffered from feature creep. And now it's got more buttons, more things to screw up. And they put the mic input as channel 2. Default is the input is channel 2.
I had
so
no
people with
idea.
Audacity, which is like, if you're going to get a Scarlett to a Solo, you're probably a beginner. Let's be honest, even though it works fine, there's nothing wrong with it.
Right.
But that's the people, and then they get Audacity. It's free. And then they hit record and they get nothing. And I'm just like, because it's channel 2 is the mic input. Why did they change it? Focusrite, are you listening?
Wow.
What the hell were you guys thinking?
Wow.
So even that, it's like there aren't a lot of really simple audio interfaces that just work, but SSL2 is one of those. If you look for the SSL2, they can often be found for under $200, and that would be my starting point. I wouldn't. Yes, you can probably luck into something cheaper that sounds good, but that's when I can feel super confident in recommending, because there are very few like buttons that are software. They're actual physical switches and knobs that do one thing. Right? And they're very clear, easy to see. The knobs they stand up proud of the interface on a table. You can see everything. It's just such an easy thing to use. And that to me is really, really important. So yeah, $200 for the interface, $150 to $250 for a mic.
Boom
30,
arm.
50, yeah, a nice boom arm or a stand. Don't don't use a tripod for live music performances that tip over and are awkward and have a long boom arm that is always in the wrong place. Get something that works for your space. If you're in a closet, or there are things you can attach to a little table or a wall or a desk. Make sure it's super easy to put the mic in the right place. And even more important, what actually determines where the mic goes is where your eyes are looking. And what determines where your eyes are looking, it's the script. So figure out, where's your script going to go? Where's it going to go? Is it going to be there every time? Especially with people, a lot of people now have a big 26, 27-inch monitor.
Mm-hmm.
If you put the script on the right side of the monitor, you're looking to this direction. If you put it over here, you're looking over here, right? So make sure you put everything in the consistent place, because that's going to determine where you're looking. That's going to determine where the mic goes, and it should be very easy to fine tune your mic placement to suit your where you're looking, and make sure it's very ergonomic. Make sure it's comfortable. Make sure you're never like, well, I have a pop screen. It's always covering one eye, or I can't really. No, if that's what's happening, it's not right. Yeah.
I put mine, and this came from my late brother was the chief engineer of Cincinnati's classical music station for a number of years. And he told me back then they were putting the mic off to the side, slightly above the mouth, aimed down at your lips, and talk past the microphone. I can say telephone poles, telephone poles, telephone poles all day long, and it'll never pop because it's aimed down and I'm looking straight ahead at the monitor where my script is. So,
that's right.
And I don't favor the mic. I
that's
know
this
that
mic
it's
right here.
There it is. Look at that. That's
same
thing.
Tip.
And for me, I've got it on a fairly large stand. I'm in a fairly large room, but I've got on a big boom stand, and so it doesn't move. I have the chair markings on the floor marked where I'm going to be.
Yeah.
So I slide into the chair. The chair, if I have somebody else in to record, I know where the chair is going to go back to. It's the consistency, and I think it's probably important to say, if you have a space, not a closet that already has a lot of clothing in it, if you've got to develop a space, it is probably more important to spend money on the space, a higher amount of money on the space than the gear. Because I think I've heard you, George, and gosh, Jim Edgar, and everybody
We're all
else
on
say
the same page about that for sure.
Yeah, you can have a $200 mic in a great room that'll sound great. You can put a $3,000 mic in a bad room and it'll sound bad.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. So let's say $500 for a mic stand, mic cable, and interface, maybe $600. Add another $100 for a decent pair of headphones that are comfortable enough that you can wear all day long. And then Mac versus PC. I'm a huge proponent of Mac because there's fewer variables can be concerned with in terms of tech. The software, we know they're not all perfect. We also know that not all Mac OSs are perfect. We know that because there's consistency over what my Mac and your Mac and her Mac and their Mac will do, because they're all the same hardware and what's under the hood.
Right.
And that level of consistency makes it so much easier for me to recommend and then support you and train you. If you're on a Windows system, there's far more variables to be concerned with. And there's just a lot more to do to make the Windows PC, let's just say, fine-tuned to be a good recording thing. Now, once it's tuned, a PC can work beautifully, and there's a lot of very talented engineers and geeky people who have very well hot-rodded and tuned PCs. And I that's fine if that's your thing, but I don't want to be concerned with that. I want to have something simpler to operate and more just predictable, right? So it's going to be a $300 Mac. Go on eBay and buy a Mac Mini M1 for $300. I just bought my daughter one on eBay. It is exactly the same computer I'm using in my studio right now. Not even
Wow.
And
kidding.
it is more than enough
It's
for
fantastic.
voiceover. And it just, since Mac controls every aspect of the hardware, the producers or the developers of digital audio workstations can more easily make their equipment work with a Mac because they don't have to worry about somebody else's graphics card or a different sound card or
Mm.
different circuitry in there.
Or an
And
IRQ
George,
conflict.
pardon me?
Or
And
an IRQ
oh
conflict.
gosh,
Anybody
yes.
Windows people know what that means.
Yeah, and George, you also just got yourself a MacBook Air, a used MacBook Air with an M1 chip in it for $800.
Hmm.
And that'll last, I don't know, it's got to
Wow.
be 3 or 4 years old, but it'll last you another 3 or 4 years or even longer. I had my first Mac was a Mac Pro a desktop that I used for 11 years.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I was able to upgrade the RAM, but all it did was work well. And my son got me to change from Windows machines to Mac, and he said, "Dad," he says, "think of the simplest, dumbest, easiest way to do something, and that's how Mac does it."
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I call it feature creep. There's feature creep in everything. Because the only way they'll sell you a new computer is to tell you that all the new stuff is so cool, you can't not get it. So you got to buy a new computer, right? But we know that in the professional world, pros don't need new things all the time. And you learn something and you learn to rely on it and you keep it in service for a long period of time. That's really the way pros work. Pros do not keep buying and upgrading every year. They use a consistent, stable thing and they use it. So, yeah.
My
So,
microphone's
yeah,
15 years old.
microphones are going to be the longest lasting piece of gear you have. It will be your microphone. It will outlast almost anything in the studio. It may at some point need to be cleaned. 10, 15 years later, you might want to get it cleaned and serviced because it's been collecting spit and dust and whatever on its capsule for many, many years. So not a bad idea. But generally, mics are a good investment.
I
They're
have
not a
like a
bad thing.
20, I have a 25-year-old Audio Technica 4033, and it's
There you
I
still
go.
had one of
hanging in the
those.
studio. And my
That's a
students
great
use it, but
mic.
it's a great mic, you know?
That was one of the
Just,
early days, non-German studio condenser, large diaphragm, cardioid mics. That was the gold. That was like they were one of the first ones to say, look, you can buy a $500 mic and it can be amazingly good and it's obtainable. So that
yeah,
one's always been, yeah, the 4033. You know, it's not as flashy or it's not been the
right.
latest native thing, but any day of the week, the 4033 holds its own.
Bet.
No problem. Yeah.
And
So,
you sound like you on it, right, Linda? You sound like you.
gosh, I do. I mean, I'm used to using my Sennheiser, but yeah, the audio I has holds a special place in my heart since it was back when I was first, really recording from home. But so George, tell us what's your process like if someone wants you to help them with their studio? How do you make that work remotely?
Hmm. Well, this is where my website gets a little out of control because I've thought of so many different ways to serve people, starting
Hmm.
from the most free thing possible, which is there's a lot of videos and blog posts on there to learn from. There's a search utility on there that's like a chatbot thing where you can click on my little tiny head and then it pops up and you can
Oh, cool.
type things in and it'll help you find answers on the website or find resources. That's all free. Then the next thing from there would be a sound check, which would be send me your audio from the gear you do already have and the setup you already have, and send me your files with a selfie of you at your mic so I can see your mic placement, and I'll take a listen and give you my notes on how you're doing. That's extremely high value prospect for $40. And
Wow.
then from there on, it's more, there's a lot of other what I call self-service or virtual engineering things like processing presets. We talked about it quite a lot, mastering presets, and all sorts of stuff. There's a lot of ways. But if you really do want to sit down and have a consultation with me one-on-one, you can do that too. There's a service called George Whittam Consults, and I'll we'll do a Zoom together, and I will answer a million questions and get you down the road as quickly as possible. And that's available as well. So there's a lot of ways we can work together. And
That's great.
I've gotten very effective at doing this stuff remotely. I do make site visits and house calls. I have a few folks who are on a membership with me. I see them on a quarterly or annual or even monthly basis, a few of them here in LA. But overall, there's so much we can do together. I also have a membership for people that want to just check in with me every couple of weeks on Zoom, join in our Zoom meetings, get more ongoing support, get, access to our webinar library. We have an extremely robust library of videos and training content now that we've built, and I teach new stuff every month. So there's a lot of different ways to get help and support at different budget points. Just depends on how much you really want to talk to me one-on-one. Okay, that's probably the most expensive,
Sure.
but there's a lot of other things we can do on different levels as well. So there's a lot of ways we can help you.
And your website, if you look your head, George the .tech, is that the move your head?
George the .tech. My name is my address.
Okay, very, very nice. I really appreciate all this
Exactly.
information.
And he's got a great team. He's got a great team as well. He's got a bunch of people working with him who, if George is not available, he's got other folks who are. And I've availed myself with Jim Edgar is one of the guys on your team still, right?
Yeah, Jim runs his own consulting business. And when I was looking to bring more people into the fold, he was one of the folks I approached. And he was like, I'd love to work with you. I respect you, and we respect each other tremendously. We're also bike nerds too. So we have multiple level bicycle nerds. So we both have a lot in common. But yeah, we've got folks at his level with just as much experience as I do that are available. And we also have Mike McGonigal, who's our resident Windows guy. So if you have a Windows specific issue, you will book, when you go to the website to book a service, let's say you go to the Windows support, it's something Windows related, you're going to only get people that are Windows experts. The system is designed so that you're going to book time with the Windows people, right?
That's
and
cool.
So whoever you get will be an expert in what it is you need to learn. The menu's long. We have services for Adobe Audition, Twisted Wave, Pro Tools, Source Connect, on and on. But it's designed so that when you book somebody's support, you're getting somebody on our team who's an expert on that thing.
Specific to that.
Yeah, that's how it's set up.
This has been great. I appreciate, and I'm sure listeners are going to appreciate all this information because this is what we all need to know. But both Rob and George, thank you for your time today. It was an absolute pleasure. And I'll put in the notes.
Thanks for having me,
you guys. Of course, this is that wraps up another episode of the Voiceover Gurus podcast. A very informative one. I'll have to figure out if I put this into 2 or not. But yeah, everybody have a great rest of your day. We'll see.